For thousands of years, the mightiest empires on earth kept repeating the very same fatal blunder. They stormed onto the Iranian plateau with weapons raised, utterly convinced they could erase this civilization from existence forever. The Macedonian phalanxes of Alexander the Great came here. Merciless Roman legions marched across these lands. Arab armies swept through beneath the banners of a new faith, and the savage Mongol hordes of Genghis Khan tore through, leaving nothing in their wake but towers built from human skulls. Any other nation would have been permanently extinguished after absorbing such a devastating succession of blows. They would have dissolved into the genetic and cultural melting pot of history, just as the Babylonians, the Hittites, and the Assyrians had done before them. But with Iran, something utterly inexplicable unfolded. Time and time again, despite being defeated on the battlefield, losing their capitals, and enduring foreign occupation, the Iranians accomplished what no other people on earth could. They swallowed their conquerors whole. Within just a few decades, the brutal invaders would find themselves speaking the Persian language, constructing the Persian architecture, adopting Persian state bureaucracy, and even dressing in Persian clothing. Again and again, the East essentially digested the West and the nomads. How did Iran manage, from antiquity all the way to the present day, to compel every major world power to take it seriously? How did they preserve their identity through it all? And how did it come to pass that Great Persia, a nation with a 5,000-year history, voluntarily shed its legendary name and forced the entire world to call it Iran? This is the story of how a single nation invented the very concept of time we live by today, transformed geopolitics into a sacred war between light and darkness, and mastered the art of losing battles in order to ultimately win eternity. To grasp the true depth of this civilization, we must rewind the clock far back. The Western world has traditionally regarded Mesopotamia, meaning Sumer and Babylon, or ancient Egypt, as the cradle of civilization. In this worldview, Iran is routinely pushed to the margins, and that is a profound historical injustice. Evolution ran its natural course here. Some 50,000 years ago, Neanderthals dominated these lands, only to be displaced by Cro-Magnons around 36,000 years ago. But the true revolution came later. Archaeologists have uncovered urban-style settlements on Iranian territory, such as the Giraffe culture and the Sauk ziggurat, dating back 6,000 to 7,000 years. Ceramic vessels from the 4th millennium before Christ offer irrefutable proof that one of the oldest civilizations on the planet took shape right here, standing shoulder to shoulder with Mesopotamia and China. The first major geopolitical force in these lands was Elam, a state in the southwest of modern Iran with its capital at the city of Susa. The Elamites were so formidable that by the 26th century before Christ, they were essentially dictating terms to the Sumerians. But the most astonishing event came in the 23rd century before Christ, when the Akkadian king Naram-Sin went to war with Elam. The conflict did not end with a simple ceasefire. A written treaty was signed, guaranteeing Elam's independence on the condition that it aligned its foreign policy with Akkad. Consider that for a moment. This is the first documented international treaty in all of human history. The Iranian world stood at the very foundation of global diplomacy. Genetically, however, the Elamites were closer to the peoples of Mesopotamia. The people we call Iranians today arrived here later. Somewhere between the 20th and 15th centuries before Christ, nomadic tribes began descending onto this mountainous plateau from the north, from the steppes of Central Asia and the Caucasus. They belonged to the vast family of Indo-European peoples, representing its distinct Indo-Iranian branch. Remarkably, their ancient language was a direct relative of Latin, Greek, and the languages spoken throughout Europe today, including English and Spanish. As they settled across these lands, they began calling themselves Aryans, meaning noble, and named their new homeland Arianum Vaja, the land of the Aryans. Over time, this word evolved into the familiar name we know today as Iran. They merged with the ancient culture of Elam and split into powerful confederations, the most celebrated of which became the Medes and the Persians. It was here, in these unforgiving mountains and deserts, that the true weapon of the Iranians was forged. It was not chariots, it was not superior bows. It was ideology. Long before the rise of Christianity or Islam, a religion was born on the Iranian plateau that turned human consciousness completely upside down: Zoroastrianism. For the ancient Iranian, life was not simply a random succession of meaningless events or a cyclical turning of seasons. The universe was understood as the arena of a total and uncompromising war between Ahura Mazda, the transcendent god of light, truth, and order, and Ahriman, the spirit of absolute evil, deception, and darkness. And crucially, Zoroastrianism drew a clear map of where this evil resided. The realm of darkness was the nomadic expanse of Eurasia, the Turan, from which devastating raids were endlessly launched. To be Iranian was to be a warrior of light. Their entire culture, their poetry, and their statehood were all constructed around the idea of actively championing the forces of good. This conviction gave the nation a phenomenal sense of unity. But Zoroastrianism accomplished something even more momentous. It was the first tradition in history to declare that time does not move in a circle. Time is linear. The world had a beginning, a creation, and it will have an inevitable end, a final battle between light and darkness, a purification of the world through fire, and a last judgment. How did this idea go on to conquer the world? When the Persians conquered Babylon in the 6th century, before Christ, they liberated the Jews who had been languishing there in captivity. Judea became a province of the Persian Empire for 2 centuries. During this prolonged period of contact, Jewish thinkers absorbed from the Zoroastrians the concept of anticipating the end of times, of linear time, and of a final judgment. This doctrine later flowed directly into Christianity and Islam. Prominent philosophers, including Friedrich Nietzsche, acknowledged that Iran played the decisive role in the discovery of linear time, the very coordinates within which we still think today. The first truly great state of the Aryans was Media, formed around 670 before Christ. The Medes did not endure for long, but they managed to bring down the fearsome Assyrian Empire. Their dominance was cut short by their own kinsmen, the Persians. In 550 before Christ, a man named Cyrus the Great, half Persian and half Mede, united his two peoples and began constructing what historians would come to call the Achaemenid Empire, the first superpower in human history. Cyrus was unlike the tyrants who came before him. When conquering Lydia, the Greek city, states of Asia Minor, or Babylon, he did not destroy their temples or enslave their populations. He built an empire on the foundation of respect. His successor, Darius I, extended the borders from Egypt to the Indus Valley. Nearly 50 million people, roughly half the population of the entire earth at that time, lived under Persian rule. Darius divided the country into 20 administrative regions called satrapies, introduced a unified taxation system, minted gold coins known as darics, and laid down a network of roads along which the fastest state postal service in the world operated. But history does not forgive weakness. In an attempt to shield the empire from the nomadic darkness of the East, Cyrus the Great ventured into Central Asia to wage war against the Massagetæ tribe. And there, the greatest emperor met his end. The battle was so savage that the Persian army was annihilated. According to Herodotus, the Massagetæ leader, Queen Tomiris, driven by a thirst for revenge over the death of her son, ordered her men to recover the body of Cyrus. She severed his head and plunged it into a leather sack filled to the brim with human blood, declaring, "You thirsted for blood, now drink your fill." Despite this tragedy, the empire endured. We tend to assume that the famous Greco-Persian wars, the ones featuring the 300 Spartans, crushed the Persians. That is a Western myth. Yes, the Greeks defended their independence. But for the colossal Achaemenid Empire, losing a handful of peripheral cities was little more than a mosquito bite. The Persians simply shifted tactics. They began funding first Athens, then Sparta, setting the Greeks against one another. Ultimately, in 387 before Christ, the exhausted Greeks were compelled to sign a humiliating treaty on the terms of the Persian king Artaxerxes. What the Persians could not seize through military force, they purchased. Persia became the undisputed master of Greece without drawing a single sword. The true catastrophe came later. The Achaemenid Empire swelled to such enormous proportions that a weakened central government could no longer hold together dozens of different nations. A young and fiercely ambitious king from Macedonia seized upon this vulnerability. Alexander, in 330 before Christ, had his Macedonian phalanxes brutally crush the Persian army. He burned the magnificent Persepolis. It appeared as though the 1,000-year history of Iran had reached its end. From the ruins of the Achaemenids arose the Hellenistic Seleucid state, ruled by Greeks. And that is precisely when the Iranian survival mechanism activated itself. Eastern culture began methodically consuming its Western conquerors. Alexander himself started wearing Persian garments and adopted Persian court customs. The policy of Hellenization choked on the dense, ancient Iranian worldview. In the 3rd century before Christ, the Parthians, an Indo-Iranian tribe, expelled the Greeks and established the Parthian Empire. The Parthian ruler Mithridates I declared himself king of kings and the rightful heir to the Achaemenids. For 5 centuries, the Parthians, relying on their highly mobile cavalry and the legendary Parthian shot, successfully held their ground against the Roman Empire itself, inflicting devastating defeats on Roman legions throughout the Middle East. Then, in the year 224, a new golden age arrived. The Safavid dynasty rose to power, hailing from the Pars region, the original homeland of the first Persians. They created a fiercely centralized state in which Zoroastrianism became the official state doctrine. Society was divided into rigid castes: priests, warriors, bureaucrats, and commoners, establishing an ideal meritocracy. Sassanid Iran was a superpower that waged grueling wars for nearly 400 years, first against Rome and then against Byzantium, for dominion over Mesopotamia and the Caucasus. But these centuries of relentless warfare drained Iran to its core. By the mid-7th century, the Sassanid Empire was a bleeding giant, a new and unprecedented force rising from the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. Capitalized on this exhaustion, the Arab Caliphate. In 651, the Persian capital fell, and the last Shah of the Sassanid dynasty was treacherously murdered. All of Iran came under Arab rule. The era of the Umayyad Caliphate had begun. The Arabs brought with them a new religion, Islam, and a new language, Zoroastrianism, which had sustained the Iranian spirit for millennia, began to fade. For any other culture, this would have meant the complete erasure of identity, just as it had for Egypt or Syria, which became permanently Arabized. But the Persians did it again. Various Arab rulers attempted to force the Persians to abandon their roots entirely. Yet, having suffered military defeat, the Iranians struck back on the cultural front. The Islamic Caliphate, particularly under the Abbasids, came to rely heavily on Persian bureaucrats, scholars, and poets. Arab caliphs adopted Persian methods of governance. The Farsi language did not merely survive. It outlived dozens of empires, and the greatest scientific treatises and poems continued to be composed in it. After the Arabs, a true apocalypse descended upon Iran. In 1220, Genghis Khan arrived from the steppes of Central Asia. The Mongols did not simply conquer territories. They massacred entire cities and obliterated thousand-year-old irrigation systems from the face of the earth. It seemed Iran would be reduced to a pasture for nomads. But when Genghis Khan's grandson Hulagu founded a Mongol state here called the Ilkhanate, something remarkable happened. The fearsome conquerors, accustomed to living in yurts, suddenly embraced Islam. They made Persian the official language of the state. They began erecting magnificent Persian mosques with blue domes and funding local scholars and poets. At the close of the 14th century, history repeated itself. Tamerlane stormed into these lands and erected pyramids constructed from severed human heads. Yet at the very same time, he stood in awe of Persian culture. He transported the finest Iranian artisans back to his capital, and his descendants, the Timurids, ignited a true Persian renaissance, transforming their courts into celebrated centers of exquisite miniatures and poetry. For nearly 300 years, Iran was a churning cauldron in which political power belonged to fearsome Mongols and Turks. But upon ascending the Iranian throne, within just a couple of generations, they became irrevocably Persian. The Iranian cultural code had completely reprogrammed its invaders. And then, out of this 300-year cauldron of tribes and dynasties, a man named Shah Ismail emerged in 1501. He reunited the country and founded the Safavid state. It was the Safavids who established Shia Islam as the state religion of Iran, forever setting it apart, culturally and politically, from the rest of the predominantly Sunni Islamic world and from the Ottoman Empire. Iran had once again forged its own rigid and distinctive identity. By the 19th century, under the Turkic Qajar dynasty, Iran entered a period of severe crisis. Following catastrophic wars against the Russian Empire, the country permanently lost the territories of modern-day Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. By the early 20th century, on the eve of the First World War, Iran had become a stage for the Great Game, the geopolitical standoff between the British and Russian empires. The country was effectively carved into spheres of influence. The British extracted Iranian oil, while Russian troops occupied the north. Later, the Soviet Union even attempted to establish a communist republic in northern Iran. The country was suffocating beneath the weight of colonial powers, but Iran would not be Iran if it did not find a way out. In 1925, Reza Shah Pahlavi came to power through a military coup. He charted an uncompromising course toward industrialization and modernization. And in 1935, he made a move that sent shockwaves through global diplomacy. For centuries, the entire Western world had referred to this country as Persia. This word, derived from the Greek name for the Pars region, had become associated in Europe with fairy tales, carpets, backwardness, and exotic fantasy. Reza Shah declared enough. He dispatched an official directive to all foreign embassies. From this moment forward, the country was to be called by its true and ancient name, the very one its people had used for millennia: Iran, the land of the Aryans. This was no mere linguistic preference. It was a declaration. We are not an exotic colony. We are a modern and powerful nation with ancient roots, and you will take us seriously. The history of Iran has always been a history of radical turning points. In the 20th century, the country found itself on the global chessboard, trapped between the competing interests of superpowers. Decades of political upheaval and foreign interference ultimately caused the country to explode in the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The monarchy collapsed. Iran became a theocratic republic, and its ties with the West were severed. And today we witness a stunning historical paradox. In the mind of the modern observer, two entirely different states appear to exist simultaneously. The word Iran conjures images of geopolitical tension, crippling sanctions, conflicts, and grim headlines. Meanwhile, the word Persia has, ironically, not disappeared at all. It has taken on a romantic, almost mythical quality. Persia is associated with lost grandeur, refined poetry, flying carpets, and legendary empires. Two names, one land, and an unending, relentless struggle over precisely how it will be remembered. Over its 5,000-year history, this culture developed the ultimate mechanism for survival. When confronted by Macedonians, Arabs, or Mongols, it did not vanish. It absorbed its conquerors, reshaping them entirely to fit its own mold. It stood at the origins of civilization and invented the very concept of time by which we live. But perhaps its greatest battle is unfolding right now, because sometimes concealed behind the simple name of a country is a quiet and invisible war. A war between who we were in the past, who we are today, and how the world has chosen to see us.